Teachers of Reddit, what is the best plot twist you didn't see coming in your students' writing? Teaching 8th grade English. A student was writing about a supernatural investigator. About 2/3 through the story, the narrator is listing all the greatest horrors he had seen. The list ended, "I once saw an English teacher named Mr. My name slough off his skin and devour a classroom of students." Quote. It was a great surprise and story. I had a student who was obsessed with silverback gorillas. I mean, everything he wrote was about silverbacks. Even for the most random question, for example, about Shakespeare's sonnets, and his answer would somehow quite logically twist around to his gorillas. After a while he added a character, the Queen of Zanzibar. She controlled this wild and often violent band of gorillas. At the end of that year, I ended up moving away, and at my farewell lunch he gave me a card which says, "There will never be another story about the silverback gorillas of Zanzibar because the Queen of Zanzibar is moving to Australia." Blew me away. I never thought his stories were analogies of our school students or that I had made that much of an impact on his life. Humbling. Teaching middle school, gave an "About Me" essay early in the year. One student wrote about how they had a rough home life, parents divorcing, etc. It was very well written and heartbreaking until the last paragraph where he talked about finding religion in the past year. I've learned not to judge people who do wrong, because only God can judge, and they will burn. I teach high school maths, so the opportunities for stories are more limited. I set an extended assignment on mathematically evaluating what would happen in a zombie outbreak, looking at what happens to the human population based on how fast zombies can turn them, if there's a cure, if zombies can raise the dead from graves, etc. The last part of the assignment was to model a zombie situation of your choice, come up with some survival strategies, and show mathematically how they helped humans. Most students picked a pop culture zombie style and used that as their inspiration. No problems. At the time, there was a big election going on, so one student decided that anyone under the sway of a particular political party must be a mindless zombie, and recreated the events of the entire election in his mathematical equations. It was a fantastic spin on it that made marking much more fun. One of my kids got a writing assignment to write a new ending to a story. It was a classic star-crossed lovers narrative, so I figured they'd do a happily ever after. Nope, the female protagonist ended up using the dude for his knight status to escape the thumb of her father, then killed him and went out on her own. I taught an English 101 where I had a very open-ended writing assignment to gauge where the students were. It was a long time ago, but if I remember correctly it was to write about something that happened in your life that was memorable. Like I said, very vague. One student wrote about how his friend had run away from home and asked to stay in his treehouse. Okay, mild enough. Then it turned pretty dark when the student wrote that he was woken up by fire sirens only to find the treehouse was completely engulfed in flames. Of course no one realized it was occupied. That was 25 years ago and I still remember the chill I got when I read it. I was picking up recycled paper for my students with severe disabilities to shred using our machine. The essay we found was about some kid that is going through abuse. I made a report and student is now doing better. I worked at a bookstore that had a spooky story contest for Halloween and I had to read a lot of stories by elementary students. They were stories by elementary students. But there was this one. On the first pass I guess I didn't like it, but when it came back from another reviewer I happened to read it again. The plot wasn't astounding. It was actually kind of a bad story as far as that goes. What was amazing was that the student changed her vernacular depending on whether the speech was spoken by a character or part of the narration. This is not elementary stuff. It was really incredible and such a small thing that I was so surprised that I even noticed it. It is literally a technique that was considered groundbreaking when Zora Neale Hurston did it, and she's one of the greatest American writers ever. There's no way this little 4th grade girl knew about Hurston. She was just doing it naturally. I was blown away. I tried my best to advocate for that story, even suggested a special prize. My boss would not give. I hope that little girl is still writing. My wife taught high school English 9th and 10th grade in California for 10 years. We are both literature majors, and so she'd often let me grade some of her papers. The amount of disclosure of being abused, raped, suicidal was, holy shit. When my nephew was 6 or 7 or so, they had to write a description of how to make a sandwich. My nephew proceeded to write a detailed account of how to make a sandwich, which includes getting a mold of a witch and putting wet sand into it. You get the idea. The teacher said in all her years of teaching that no kid had ever done that. She asked to keep a copy because she thought it was so funny. I had a student write an amazing argumentative essay. He was a shy kid, and we had been working on building his confidence and taking risks in his writing. I get to the end of the paper and he notes, "I always wanted to include this argument, but I just wasn't sure." He leaves a citation. I go to his works cited and see a proper citation along with a hyperlink. I click it. Rick Astley begins to sing. I wipe away a tear. Well done, kid. Well done. I had a second language learner who wrote about the death of a close relative. He talked about feelings of extreme sadness, and then said, "I have come to know that this feeling is called grief." It was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever read. Not a teacher, but in high school, we had this creative writing assignment, where we were given the choice of 3 different pictures to base our stories on. I chose one where you could see a man cleaning a room, and you could see that he had swept things under the carpet because there was a big lump on it. I wrote this whole thing about the guy panicked cleaning before his guests would arrive, and him desperately trying to flatten the lump. In the end, it turned out that the lump was a body, and his guests were the police. Pretty tame, I know, but the way I wrote it, I purposefully made spelling and grammar mistakes through the text, except that when you read the twist, you would realize that they weren't actual mistakes and everything was grammatically correct. My teacher had even noted all of my mistakes with a red pen, but wrote a note basically saying, "Never mind, just read the ending." I showed it to my dad after I got it back, and he burst out laughing when he read it through. I had to write new ending to a story about how a white boy, choosen, was adopted by an Indian tribe after a raid on his family. The white settlers attacked the Indian tribe years later, found the white kid and brought him back to live with them. In my new ending, choosen considered the tribe to be his real family and escaped to rejoin with the survivors. Shortly after, the tribe along with choosen ambushed the settlers and slaughtered them in revenge. All seemed well and the tribe were grateful to have choosen back with them. That was until they all started getting an odd rash and dying. As it turns out, choosen had unknowingly brought back smallpox with him and spread it among the tribe. I ended with some deep to me as a 12-yo line about how war is stupid, nobody wins and everyone loses in the end. Fun note, my teacher actually thanked me for putting so much thought into the assignment and I got an A+. Ultimately I failed her class because that was legit the only time I ever applied myself and actually turned an assignment in. Not a teacher, but in high school my class was tasked with writing a 1 to 2 page essay about an unpleasant experience in our lives. So, I wrote a 12-ish page, third-person narrative about myself writing the essay. Not a teacher but a student. We were set a challenge in English Lit at high school to rewrite the ending to Of Mice and Men. Can't remember all the details, but my ending change was that George shoots Lenny, then turns the gun on himself out of guilt. I then detailed a final scene, where a small mouse scurries along the floor, and settles in Lenny's hand. I was made to read out the 2 to 3 page ending to the class, and it got used as an example for the next few years in other classes. I think my teacher was surprised that I wrote something with so much thought and detail, and actually read the book. I wasn't known for my soft side, I was a bit of a class joker. My only ever A** work at school. I had a student write that she flew to California to see Post Malone because he's so hot. She got a henna tattoo on her chest of him before the concert. Unfortunately, it turned out she's allergic to henna and it turned into a terrible rash. She still has the scar. Plot twist, it turned out to be a permanent tattoo. Nat, but when my son was in 2nd grade his teacher gave out the usual coloring page plus writing prompt. It was a Halloween theme. There was a smiling child in a costume, holding a bag, and the prompt was, when I looked inside my trick or treat bag, I found. My child wrote, a human head. 7 years old and already a master of the horror plot twist. Cool. They turned it in. Not a teacher, but one time in middle school I wrote about a story called Eye Flaps. The story takes place in a society where people can't blink, and this scientist discovers blinking serum and is so happy he blinks his eyelids off and dies of sleep exhaustion. Years later my mom told me that the teacher RLLY enjoyed the story and said it had great twist at the end. Still proud of that story to this day. My teacher was surprised when we were given a short story assignment. What happened was the assignment stated we had to write a story. It didn't say how long it could be, it just had a minimum. So I wrote a long-ass book full of plot twist, character development, specific explained setting, a theme, moral, a cliffhanger, and just good stuff. It was obviously not the greatest thing ever, it was 8th grade, but I think I did well. I actually became dedicated to it, so the next school year, I memorized my old teacher's birthday, and spent a long-ass time writing a book on Google Docs, printed it, bought a blank book cover, and gave her the second volume of the first book, with an ending this time. The book was about a group of Arctic explorers who found a caveman of sorts in the ice, and when they let it out, it released a disease unto the explorers, and then they spread it across the world in accident. The cliffhanger is hard to explain. Not a teacher but a former student who didn't try. It was my senior year. My body had shit on me a bit and I had my gallbladder removed my first semester in school. So I didn't try much for the rest of the year. At the same time I had gotten depressed. A lot of different things fed into it. But I had written a paper we were tasked with doing about my demons. The teacher said that we could cuss in it or whatever and that there would be no consequences. So I unleashed my mind onto the paper. Instead of blowing my brains out onto it, I wrote all of my thoughts. I've since been diagnosed with chronic depression, so I like dark jokes to cope with my inability to feel true happiness longer than a few moments. The teacher broke down crying. While writing it I broke down crying as silently as possible and then fell asleep after turning it in. So after everyone had left she woke me up and we talked for a few minutes about it. She said that the way my mind worked was beautiful and that it was amazing to see. But that I need to distract my depressed bits so that I don't get brought down by it. So yeah. My teacher marked exams for the whole country and she was just responsible for what they only called the pit. AKA ones that had been flagged for social services. She had all sorts from abuse, one student had written about her sister's court case, to religious fanatics. She had one that was entirely, Allah Akbar. Our freshman teacher asked us to write a continuation to Of Mice and Men, so I turned it into a ghost story. The setting is Crooks and Candy having a conversation in the barn. They're talking about George and wondering why he hasn't moved on and why he goes off alone every night. Candy thinks George is paying Lenny's ghost a visit out at the spot where he died. Crooks confesses that he can't sleep at night because he feels like the ghost of Curly's wife is haunting the barn. My teacher asked to keep the essay.